right, we're calling the meeting to order at 6:04. Can I get someone to make a motion to accept the agenda, please?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, thank you for that agenda. Communications with parents, citizens, and staff. Is there anyone here who we haven't invited that would like to talk to us before we start our meeting? Okay, I'm assuming not, so we're going to keep moving on. Tonight we specifically invited legislative guests here. Tonight with us is Peter Conlon, who is the representative for Goshen, Salisbury, Ripton, Cornwall. Is there any others? Leicester. I knew there was another one. And he's also the chair of the Education Committee in the House, correct? Also with us is Stephanie Jerome, who is the representative from Brandon, and only Brandon.
Right.
You're welcome. And what committee you're on? Commerce, correct?
Right, I'm the vice chair of the Commerce Committee.
Vice chair of the
Commerce and Economic Development.
Okay. Other legislative members that I asked to come, I heard from 4 of the 6 senators. The 3 Republican senators said that they were busy with another meeting tonight. And I think that is because there is a meeting at the Rutland Country Club tonight for some medical.
Yeah, there's a reception for the medical society.
Right, medical society, which means dollars for whatever, so they couldn't come. And then another one said that she had something else going on, and those were the only ones I heard from. I thought about changing and flip-flopping, maybe having the legislators come on the 15th, but then I thought, you know what, let's have it with the people who are here, and then if we feel we need to have another meeting with them, or if they'd like to come back, hopefully, we'll set up another meeting before the legislative session begins. Okay? Okay. So, in that style, can we just go around, because they don't necessarily know all of you, and just state your name, where you're from, and we'll go from there.
Excuse me, Lori?
Yeah.
Do you want us to sit somewhere?
If you want to sit in the front where everybody can see you, that'd be awesome, if you don't mind. So, Lauren, we'll start with you.
All right, I'm Lauren Thomas. I'm from Brandon. I've been in Brandon now for 4 years. This is my first year on the school board, and I'm just looking to help out, make a change, see what I can do. Nice to meet you.
I'm Leslie Bienvenue, and I'm from Leicester, and I've been living in Leicester for 14 years, and I'm new to the board as well, and I'm here to contribute in any way possible.
Hi, my name is Natalie Steen. I represent Brandon. I've lived in Brandon for about 20 years, and I have 4 children that are in the school system, or, well, one is at Castleton now, so 3. And I've been on the school board this is my 2nd term.
My name is Greg Babcock. I live in Pittsford. I've lived in Pittsford 47 years. So this is my 2nd meeting, so.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Rivera. I live in Pittsford. This is my 2nd year as a student representative on the school board, and I go to Otter Valley.
My name is Lori Bertrand. I'm from Sudbury. I've lived there 30 years. I've been on the board I've been on this board since its inception in 2016, but I was on the prior Sudbury school board for 6 years prior to that.
Hi, I'm Jessica Markowski. I lived in Brandon for 12 years, and now I live in Florence, Pittsford for almost a year, and this is my first year on the board.
Hi, Charlene Bryant. I'm recording secretary for the district. I've been the recording secretary for probably close to 20 years with both the new district and the individual boards prior to the consolidation.
Hello, Brett Mullen, rep from Pittsford. Lived in Pittsford for, I guess, about 12, 13 years, something like that now. 2 kids at Lothrop.
Barbara Ebling. I live in Brandon. I've been here 28 years. I have 3 daughters who are all at Otter Valley. I'm a at-large rep to the board, and I've been on the board for something like maybe 6 years, I think.
Kevin Thornton, also from Brandon, 5th year. I just want to tell everybody that Stephanie started lending me baby and little kid clothes, I think 20 years ago.
Glad to pass it on to Brian.
Mr. Giles, you're here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
It's pronounced Giles.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. And I'm a Brandon Select Board member. I was invited to come tonight.
Great. And
forget us.
Oh yeah, Fernanda. I always forget you people up there. I was going around the rest of the room though first, and then I was going to go on screen, maybe. Go ahead, Fernanda.
Definitely, that was the plan.
Hi, I'm Fernanda Canales. I represent the little but mighty town of Goshen. Educator for 39 years, 16 of those in Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union. And this is my 3rd year on the board, and I have 2 OV graduates who are now big people.
Renee?
Oh, hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Ernest Sanchez, and I am the interim superintendent for Rutland Northeast.
Stacy or Alyssa, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Oh, sorry, my camera's not coming on. It's doing something funny here. Hi, I'm Stacy Farrington. I am the principal at Lothrop Elementary.
Okay. And how about you, Brenda? Oh, I was just going to go around.
Okay, Brenda Fleming. I'm the business manager, and I am in my 30th year.
Debbie Alexander, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and this is going on my 10th year at Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union.
Diane Benware, I'm the chair of the Select Board in the town of Leicester. I've been so for the last 15 years, and along with that, I've also retired 6 years ago after 42 years of teaching.
Nice.
Yay, Diane!
Hello, Fernanda. Well, thank you.
Yeah, so we invited you here both. Well, we invited a lot of people, but I'm so glad both of you came, because that means that you value education and what's going on with our kids. We invited you here to talk about what's going on in education, what you think might be happening in the next legislative session, and then open it up to questions from everybody, just to talk about where we think we're headed, what we should be expecting, and I'm sure there's other questions as well, but. So do you want us to just start peppering you with questions, or do you?
I'd be happy to provide a little bit of an update.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm Peter Cullen. I am the rep. I'm from Cornwall. I'm a 17-year veteran of the school board, the Addison Central School District, first the high school board, and then our unified board, and served as chair for a number of those years. And I've been in the House for 8 years, all 8 years on the House Education Committee, and the last 2 years as chair of the House Education Committee. And we're the ones who mostly deal with education policy as opposed to education funding and taxes. However, we work very closely with the folks on the Ways and Means Committee that make a lot of the tax decisions. I'm also the House member who currently sits on the Commission on the Future of Public Education, which we created at the end of the last legislative session to bring people from throughout the field and elsewhere to the table to say, okay, this past year we sort of hit a tipping point, and we are at a point where we need to rethink how we fund, deliver, and basically do education in Vermont in a way that we can sort of preserve what we all like about it, and to preserve a high quality education, but bring it to a level that Vermonters can afford. That's no small undertaking, as those of you who have been on this board for a while know, because I've watched this board struggle with that and frankly do pretty amazing work to do that for this district. making some very hard decisions that probably weren't always very popular. And it's really time to look at how are we going to deal with that on a statewide basis, and what does an education in Vermont look like at a time when we have perhaps 25,000 fewer students from 25 years ago, where we have a teacher staffing crisis, where even some of the most attractive districts are running at about 30% emergency and provisional licenses, and other areas of the state where it's harder to attract people, they're running 50 or higher percentage. And we all know that really the most effective tool in the education toolbox is a highly qualified teacher in front of a right-sized classroom of students. So it's high time that this all get looked at. And frankly, it's probably, we've reached a point where Vermonters are ready to start having the hard conversations that go along with that. And that means, rethinking some of the things that we cherish most here. Small class sizes, really small class sizes, very small schools, very small high schools, short bus rides. Are we reaching a point as a society where we can sort of accept changes that will not only make education more affordable, but actually provide more opportunity for students as we go forward. So that's what the commission is meant to deal with. It's an 18-month commission, after what point it's supposed to deliver a report to the legislature with actionable recommendations. Meanwhile, it has a number of subcommittees that are working on different aspects of that. One of them is a finance subcommittee that exists for the entire length of the commission, but is also tasked with coming up with some cost containment recommendations that the legislature can act on in 2025. The question is going to be, well, what are those? Well, it's hard to think of anything, any new ideas that haven't been talked about for years. We have an excess spending threshold that we've reinstituted. The debate then might become, do we mandate class sizes? Do we mandate ratios? These are all things that are a lot more complex than they sound on the surface. And then we have the complex timing situation in that you all are going to be developing your school budgets before we even set foot in the State House in January. So one thing that really needs to happen is we all need to signal to you folks as to what's going on and what we're trying to do, so you know what to prepare for. And I think hopefully some of those signals will be coming by the end of October. Again, I'm not sure, if you ask people, well, what's your magic wand? Nobody has one, because there isn't really anything easy to do other than sort of throwing more money at the problem. Sort of the challenges that are faced in 2025 is probably something you're all very well aware of. The governor has sent to everybody involved a letter. So have your associations, the School Boards Association, Superintendent Association, sort of saying, we are going to still be up against high healthcare costs. We're still going to be up against whatever inflation might be that's sort of school particular. We are still working through some of the highest contract negotiation settlements we've seen in recent history. So these are all things that continue to exist that you're going to have to work toward or work with as a school board. And then, of course, the legislature, in order to help bring down the tax rate increase, we committed more money to the education fund. Some of that is, about 30 million of that is ongoing, but another 65 million of that was one-time surplus dollars in order to help bring it down. Now that's less than was what the governor was proposing, but in either case, you not only have to sort of deal with just the inflationary factors of the cost of education, but then, we sort of bought down tax rates for another year, and then that's another sort of challenge. Do we find another $65 million in revenue to make that up? Or do we look to the field to sort of help hold down costs so that we can sort of stay at that level? So anyway, that's sort of a rundown of the challenges. I think it's really great that we're now in October, but you're trying to get a handle on what's happening early on before you start your talks about what the budget's going to look like for next year.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any questions?
I didn't mean to dominate here.
Kevin?
So it sounds like, in a sense, what you're having is a very old conversation because the school consolidation's been an issue in Vermont since the 1890s at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have been talking just even since the beginning of this school year a lot about should we build a new middle school? What's it going to look like? What can it cost? How can we raise the money? Blah, blah, blah. Is that a conversation that's worth having if we're going to be told that districts are going to get larger and kids maybe be bused into Rutland or whatever in a few years?
I think it's a great question, and I think the whole school construction question is yet another challenge and something that we are also working on. We used to have a program that assisted schools in construction and renovation projects to the tune of about, let's just say in general, 30% of qualifying expenses. That went away in the economic recession of 2008 and has not been brought back. So there's no great incentive being offered to sort of move in that direction. However, that we hope is going to change in the next year or two to provide. It's a new program, but it will look at it will likely look at projects based more on, do they sort of work toward a state goal of I don't want to call it more consolidation, but better economies of scale. I think it's worth it. I think it's a conversation worth having because it's whatever comes out of it is going to require, a good, strong facilities master plan that sort of shows where the district wants to go. I think you could probably also make the argument, depending on what your numbers are, that moving, let's say, your sixth graders or fifth and sixth graders into a middle school then might alleviate the pressure on the schools that you have right now because you folks have already gone through a redesign of your footprint and have created larger class sizes. So, if it all sort of can be put into a larger picture that shows that you are, not only sort of looking at economies of scale, but also providing more opportunity for students, because often when you have more students under one roof, you have economies of scale to provide more opportunities. I would say it is a conversation probably still worth having.
Okay, thanks.
That was my way of saying yes.
Fernanda.
I'm just curious, Peter, if you can speak about the commission and how it was, who are the members and how were they selected?
Yep. So the one of the things that's always hard to do as a legislator is to make lists, and that's like lists of people who are going to be on a commission. So this is we tried to keep it at a relatively small number, so it's 13, and they represent sort of folks from throughout the field of education, superintendents, principals, the NEA for teachers, rural sort of rural schools. So we have a former superintendent. Well, your former superintendent, John Castle, is on it, sort of representing rural schools, and his. Much of his career and his whole life was spent in the Northeast Kingdom. We have 2 legislators. We have the chair of the State Board of Education, and we have the Secretary of Education, and a representative from the independent schools as well, because about 4,000 of our students in Vermont get their public education through the use of a voucher and attending an independent school.
Okay, thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about the governor's letter that he sent to all boards. Everybody should have received it through.
You want me to say anything?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Just a little bit. So I am in my role in the House Commerce Committee. My role in education is tangential to what Peter was discussing. So we discuss. We are concerned a lot about career and technical education. And so that sort of falls under our purview, and that is sort of little fuzzy, I guess, you know, and all that's, and where that sort of lies and, you know, where to go in the future for that. But, you know, we're very concerned because in my committee, we work on workforce development, very concerned that that students who would like to get skills that they could get at a career technical education center or perhaps within their own school are able to do that. And I've spoken to many businesses around the region, and they're desperately in need of skilled workers and students who would like, you know, students who graduate and would like to continue on working in the area. And there's a number that's bandied about saying that about 3,000 kids a year graduate from high school without a plan. And I'd like to see that number decrease dramatically. I think Stafford, it appears to me that Stafford is at capacity and turns away students from my conversations with the director there. And so I'd like to see more programs built up in established at schools that are maybe the sending that might not duplicate, but would maybe complement programs at our career technical education centers. I think Otter Valley has a great opportunity to be that one of those pilot schools that can do that. So, and when, you know, both Peter and I are hoping to be reelected to the legislature next year. We obviously, you know, it's a campaign season, and so I've been out talking to many people, and obviously property taxes is a huge concern. People are upset, but when I explain to them the issues at hand, they seem to be a little, you know, the finances are still jarring for a lot of people, but they understand the problems. Yeah, so I just wanted to sort of mention that. I think that we are, right, we're all working towards the same goal, but and I guess just knowing that people understand, they're concerned, they're understanding. And I actually think when we're talking about buildings, a good school, good, beautiful buildings, I mean, well-done buildings, repaired buildings that are functional and in good shape is a huge economic development draw for rural Vermont, and I feel that our schools have to be strong in our rural areas. And if we can do something like a middle school, or keep our buildings up to date and in good shape, then it only helps our entire region. And I think it's what makes sense. People don't often talk about schools as maybe an economic development draw, but it's really, really important to rural Vermont.
Questions for Stephanie?
Stephanie, I just wanted to say thank you for that, and RDSU and OV would be first in line if that comes to fruition, because I think, like you said, we are ripe for being able to expand on opportunities for our students, and we'd be happy to do it.
Kevin?
Said what I wanted to say. So.
Ah, there you go. Okay.
I will just add one more thing about CTEs. We commissioned a study with the Agency of Education that sort of came up with a roadmap to sort of how the whole funding and CTE system should move forward. It didn't really tell us anything we didn't already know, but it confirmed a lot of things. That sits now with the Agency of Education. We have a new secretary. I think she has a very strong interest in CTEs, and we are essentially awaiting recommendations from the agency to the legislature as to how to move forward. It's really, this whole CTE funding thing, as you all know, and the way money moves with it, and disincentives and incentives is hard, and even among CTE directors, they don't necessarily agree the best path forward. But hopefully, the idea is to really strengthen CTEs and try to do some of the things that Stephanie's talking about to make sure that they function for all students who want the opportunity.
Say something. I actually want to thank Stephanie for all the work she's done for this district and this school in particular.
Oh, thank you.
I have a dumb question.
No question is dumb. Didn't you learn that in school?
No, all my questions are dumb. Ask my wife. You know, in education, right? I mean, there's a huge shortage of staff, and particularly around special education, right? I mean, we keep seeing the numbers of students that need special ed services going up. there's a shortage of paras, there's a shortage of special educators, there's a shortage of speech language pathologists, we go down the whole list, right? That seems like an area where tech ed could maybe step up and create programs to help fill those voids as at least a feeder into the school system. And then, school systems also need to step up to take, if someone comes in as a para, to get them on the path to being more, so.
The sort of para to teacher transition, there's actually a lot of state programs that are out there and working with our state college system to really make that happen and really at low cost. There are other pathways. A lot of the positions you're talking about, of course, licensed positions and require a college degree and sometimes a master's degree. So it's hard. Ultimately, a lot of these conversations spin down to housing. And it's like, my question with everything we ever talk about is like, well, who's going to do it and where are they going to live? That's we could spend a whole night just on housing.
But we have been working a lot on workforce development and training in this, like in the field of education, exactly that, like taking people who already are in their community, working within this sphere of education and helping people get to the next step. And there are programs, and
Well, it seems
hoping
like
they'll be successful to doing just exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, because it seemed like 20 years ago, a lot of the tech centers started doing for healthcare, right? Started offering low-level programs to get people on, into the system, and then we saw programs evolve at, like Vermont Tech and other colleges, right? Because we saw that need where all of our healthcare workers were aging out, and we're kind of in the same position now with education, where we have huge staffing needs. And
it would be wonderful if we could expand our CTE programs to do that. At the moment, I think our Stafford is sort of the primary CTE center for us, and they're at capacity. I don't envision them creating new programs unless they drop something. But that being said, I don't see a reason why some of the sending schools can't develop a unique program that's not offered at the center, at the individual schools. Would be a really wonderful idea.
I will say, I like the idea of developing some sort of tech ed or career development at OV or within OV, because when I think about like the seniors here that want to go to Stafford or they want to go to like early college, and it's like in their head, the best possible thing senior year is to get out of OV and to do something else. Like, oh, I can't get into Stafford, and then they get upset that they have to spend their senior year here, and they don't have that sense of senior community because, they wanted to get out and do something else. But if we had more tech ed or some sort of programs here in the school that our seniors could kind of work on, keep them here, I think that would also help just develop like a sense of community in the school.
It's an interesting conversation, and I totally agree that OV is sort of perfectly situated for that because of Stafford's capacity, the distance that OV is from Stafford and all that. But it's sort of contrary to sort of the vision we had of regional career technical education developed, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago. Sort of we're swinging back to, I think probably as more and more kids pursue it, and more, then there's more and more need out there, and these are turning into good paying jobs that you can raise a family on. I think that it probably does need to be there. And your conversation about keeping kids in school is also really important.
That might be a Brenda question.
Sure.
Or anyone that can answer it, because I know that I can't. But didn't I see something where we've yet changed the equation for figuring out CLAs? Is that true?
We did.
Well, I know we. What I say,
we did. Brenda did not fix that.
So it's the collective we.
They did that. Yes, and I will talk a little bit more about it. At the end of the day, what it is designed really to do, and by all means chime in, it's designed to lessen the gap between what we have as a unified equalized rate and what taxpayers actually end up paying based on their CLA. So it takes the yield, the property yield, and it divides it by a statewide average CLA, which is 76.6%. So it drops the yield down so that when you do the math, the lower the yield, the higher the tax rate, that when we are presenting our unified tax rate, it's already adjusted for 76%, or it's adjusted up by 25%.
So our rate is gonna look high then, relative to last year.
I will recalculate
Right.
last year so it's comparable, but then when you go to adjust it to the town, so for example, if, let's just pretend Pittsford is actually at 30% instead of 26%, then your tax rate will move only by that 4%, instead of going from 100 down to the, whatever example I used, which I think was
76.
76.
Well, that's the best explanation of that I've heard. That was great. Very helpful.
Can I use this time just to tell you one other thing? I like what you said, Brett, and I'm glad that you are a member of our negotiating team. We are going into negotiations. We actually have a provision in our para contract where we will help support a paraeducator who wants to go and become a licensed teacher, where we'll provide health care benefits for a year so that they can do that. And we do believe quite strongly in promoting from within, and we keep talking more and more about that and the importance of doing that, because you've invested in a valuable employee. They know our systems, they know our procedures. You know, they're already, 6 steps ahead of somebody from the outside world.
And they have housing.
And they already have housing.
Questions?
Lori, you had asked about the governor's letter. I'm curious what you had.
Yeah, so my question is that, of course, he jumped, I feel like he jumped right off the bandwagon before anybody really had a chance to do anything else and said, I just want everyone to know that property taxes are going up 7% this year, whether you like it or not, and, and is telling the school boards that we need to, contain costs. And the issue with that is that we're always going to see teacher increases in salaries. There's those healthcare costs again. There, all of the things that we need, and there's all those things that go up just a little bit. It's never a lot, but it's always something. What is it that he wants? If he wants us to zero base our budget, which I think is impossible, if we want to keep everything that we provide to our students, how do we do that? And how do we let you know that we can't do that as a board?
I guess I think that the governor's letter and the letter from the associations, which essentially were kind of giving the same message, is just to say, hey, just because of healthcare, inflation, and the things that we know, we're already looking at a 7% increase. That's statewide. And I think, so it is laying down the challenge to school boards to say, please keep that in mind as you are making your decisions. Probably some school boards need to keep that in mind more than others. If you look at Barry, that went through 5 votes and really cut to the bone, probably to the detriment of their education, or other areas. And you folks did, you guys did some very serious paring here. The message, if statewide we can help keep down the increase in education costs because we have a shared statewide funding system, that impact affects everybody.
I have a funding question that might be a good time to bring up. So, we went through the whole thing last year, right, with changing the funding model, and obviously we all know how that went. We don't really need to rehash it, but
it blew up. Let's just, you can say that.
But then, right, we changed. There was this like a phase-in period for those that were losing tax capacity, right? So you said, was it $65 million that was added as a surplus last year? That was 100% of the difference there, right? There was that phase-in period, right? Am I correct on this?
Yes, there is a phase-in.
So districts that lost, they didn't lose any money last year, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I don't know that to be true. I think that, I can't remember what the steps were.
So my question would be, right, so we should be on the next step, the 5-year phase-in, so 80%, 60%, I don't know. It depends on what it was last year. How much is that, for that total the total cost of that phase-in period, and is that what the $65 million was for? And if so, it seems like, I mean, the rest of the school districts probably shouldn't be paying for that. It's a lot to ask. So I just didn't know kind of how much money we're talking about there, and I don't know any of those answers, so.
Yes, so the money is not there to backfill the phase-in because it's that phase-in, nobody is getting extra money. They just aren't having to make the cuts that Act 127 sort of, I don't want to say make the cuts, but they're receiving sort of less funding because of their weight of students than they previously would have. So,
well, their tax rate got reduced, right? So that would put the ed fund at a deficit for 5 years?
No, there was a time in my life I'm trying to forget.
We all are.
Because they were seeing a rapid decrease in their average weighted daily membership of students, the number of weighted kids that they were counting, they had some protection from that, what would be kind of an immediate crash, to be more of a slow phase-in. So it is not as if they're being given extra money, they're just not facing, well, depending on how you want to look at it, they are not facing the consequences of their weight as rapidly as they normally would have. I mean, depending on how, if you want to talk about how, a student means this much money from the ed fund, or it's all about tax capacity, their tax capacity decrease is slower, is on a 5-year phase-in, rather than taking that hit immediately.
This is a question I probably shouldn't even ask. Did you guys know how much that was going to cost over the 5 years before you passed that bill? I mean, does anyone know what the number is associated with that?
No, I don't. Well, I don't think we do, because weights change year to year, and we don't know what necessarily a student, what the 5-year or 3-year, whatever the rolling average is that's being used. And this is really, weedy stuff. So I'm not sure anybody assigned a cost to it, because it was not about providing extra money, but slowing the hit on those who were going to see a decrease in taxing capacity.
I think I remember the conversation, and I think the year one cost was about $30 million, but I can find out and report back to you. I don't know for sure.
And that's as compared with as if it was a different reality. It's not that we're adding more money in. It all depends on how you want to do the math.
It's just a deficit on the ed fund, right?
Yes.
Because there's less money going in, the same amount going out, and eventually it'll catch up.
Well, there's always the same amount. It's a self-leveling fund. There's no deficit in it ever. That's why property taxes go up.
But you are right that if it was 30 million, and that's just from memory, it was a bad time. It wasn't a good memory. It would be 20% less in the future.
Yeah.
Natalie?
I'm curious how the committee looks at other factors. So you can't be looking at education in a silo, right? There are a lot of other factors that affect it, like economic development. We need to increase our revenue. So what are we doing? What is Congress doing legislature doing to improve that, bring more revenue in? Are they looking at trends in healthcare? Why have healthcare costs gone up? Are people not getting the wellness care that they need? Like, I'm just thinking of what are all the different factors that you're looking at when you're making these kinds of considerations?
Well, it is all interconnected.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, work with Peter's committee is education, and mine's economic development and commerce, and another one is healthcare. So we do try to work together. But we have an aging population by by its definition, older people require more health care. And our health care costs are going up tremendously.
Yeah.
Across the board. As a private business owner, I 20% increase every year is not, it doesn't seem unusual anymore. I mean, it's awful. And that takes a hit on, in a high, so that alone, hinders a private business from expanding if they have to, really cut back on healthcare or provide benefits, reduce benefits for their employees. And so that, healthcare alone. And I know we had a conversation with the chair of the healthcare committee the other day, and they are looking at this new report that's come out about all the different hospitals that perhaps could close if something else doesn't happen to those 4 hospitals in Springfield and North Country and Gifford and there's another one, Grace Cottage. So that's a big issue. And economic development, yeah, we're definitely trying to train, upskill new people to get to fill the jobs with Vermont State University, with CCV, with UVM, trying to get more students to stay in Vermont. Passed a bill a couple of years ago that incentivized any student that graduates from a Vermont State college or university to stay here for 2 years, and we're hoping that helps. There's all this, CCV. If you earn less than $75,000 in your family, you go for free to CCV. So all that stuff is helpful, and there's just so many pieces trying to bring it in. And then Agency of Commerce and Community Development has all these programs to get Canadian companies who want to have a Buy America foothold in the States to co-locate in Vermont. That's helping more north of here, but just getting more and more businesses to stay, to grow. And there is a lot of positive things happening. And Brandon, I think, has done well with this economic development. I think we're one of the few growing towns in the state. The reason I have only Brandon as my district now is because Brandon grew. So there's a lot of good. I mean, I see there's a lot of good happening, but I think a lot of it's not happening fast enough for all of us. We're not replacing our aging population, but we're not losing population in the state either. I think there's a sort of a message, or we hear that we're losing population. We're not. We're actually growing. So I think it is all interconnected. And housing, healthcare, and education are pivotal to our region to succeed. And we have to grow that economic base in order to get more tax dollars here to get more to fund our schools.
The fact is, our demographics are catching up with us. We knew it was going to happen, and it's arrived. We are growing, but we tend to be growing by attracting older Americans to Vermont. And we have fewer kids, we have fewer young people, we don't have housing available for attracting people.
Smaller families.
But healthcare and education are probably the 2 biggest things where our demographics are really hitting. And the 2 are absolutely connected because healthcare costs are such a major factor in the budget increases that we all have to deal with. You probably know what a family plan costs. If you get a CDHP Gold plan, it's a $47,000 a year healthcare benefit. And our healthcare costs are high because we are an aging population, and the pressure on healthcare is huge. Cost of prescription drugs. We had folks from from VHI, who manages the healthcare program for public school employees, come in and speak to us. And they said, we can show you all the charts and graphs. The fact of the matter is it's really due to a small number of super high need covered people that really bring everybody's rates up.
Kevin?
Not to remind you too much of the bad old days of a year ago, but when you complimented us on our rational decision-making, going through it, I didn't feel that way at all, because our teacher contracts were done, our administrative contracts were done, and so our ability to cut and the things that we could look at were extremely limited. I remember on the R and issue board, we talked about $1,000 in office supply costs for probably half an hour. So we don't want to go through that again.
And when I was really talking about your long-term decision-making that had gone on in this district in the past 10 or 15 years.
I mean, I don't know if we want to rehash it, right? But also it comes down to timing, right? Because like it or not, I mean, the whole 5%, 10% thing, right? I mean, our administrators wouldn't be doing their job if they didn't bring something forward that was pretty darn close to that 10%. We didn't make that language, but, you know, that made sense for our students and for our districts. So then to have that change last minute and, you know, obviously that created a lot of mistrust between us and our communities and us and you guys in Montpelier. And first things first is that trust needs to be rebuilt. And I think we still see it, you know, I mean, in Pittsford where I am, our select board didn't really want to accept, you know, how much money they were going to have to send to the state. And, you know, is that helpful? No, it's not helpful at all. But that's the reality of where we're at. So, and the governor's letter, I don't think helps with that either. And if we were to do nothing and still ask for 7% more, probably that's not going to go over well with our voters either. So, you know, I think the real shame about everything that happened was that the trust is fractured, and there's a lot of bad energy out there around education. Obviously, it took us several tries to get a budget passed. Hopefully, we're past that. I don't know if we are, but, you know, so I think that's really the message from everything that happened a year ago.
You all did such a you did an amazing job. And I think I mentioned previously that I've been campaigning and talking to a lot of people. When I hear people say there's too much fat or there's too much bloat in the school budgets, I'm like, wait a minute, where have they been? Like, listen, like where were people last year listening to all of this? And would love for I struggle with getting information to people in my community, and I know it's very hard for you to get people to read and to listen and to appreciate all the work you've done. And I would just love to see more maybe starting from now, like getting that information out, that people really understand all the incredible work that's done from this board and all the incredible work that's done in the school and how amazing the school is. And I'm hoping that can be done so people just kind of better understand the importance of having a really solid educational system that in our community.
Ms. Ben-Mayor, I saw your hand raised.
Yes, because I was thinking of it, looking at it from the municipal side of things, because we build our budget, we don't run on a fiscal year, we run on a calendar year, but we started hearing inklings in the town of Leicester, just about a year ago, that the costs were going to be high. So we went through our budget, as we always do, item by item, trying to decide what can we do, what can we not do. So there were decisions made to defer things because we knew the education portion was likely to be high. So yes, it looks good that our increase was only 1.1%. However, those deferrals are going to come back later to bite us.
Oh yeah.
And no matter how much we try to level it and keep it low, unless all the players are doing that, the school boards, the legislators, for the legislators, and I'm sorry it's going to sound harsh, but to come back and override the governor's vetoes and, double your salaries and this, that, and the other thing. I don't want to go there, but, that's what's out there. But, so that's what the public is hearing, and that's what they believe. So if we're gonna fight this battle and get the biggest bang for our buck and educate our students, then we all have to be working together, and we all have to look at the budgets really closely and say, what can we do, what can we not do, how are we going to do this? And it can't just all be on the backs of the school board, it can't all be on the backs of the local people either, but there has to be more communication and more transparency all around if we're going to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, last year, because of the Act 127 5% situation, it sort of delayed, because we had to deal with that first, it sort of delayed being able to address things in a bigger way. The bottom line, however, is that last year, the budget's proposed an increase statewide of $250 million. I mean, that was really an unprecedented increase in education spending, and that, you know, roughly translates to a 25-cent increase on the statewide education tax rate. And we all know the reasons for that. It was, you know, the loss of the federal funding, the maintaining of the services that the students needed because the students needed them, inflation, the huge increase in healthcare costs. These are all, you know, which one of those can we do without? I'm not sure we can do that. That's what makes this just so darn challenging, is that there's not an easy thing except to say, well, we could just fund it differently. The money might still be the same, but we could fund it differently.
I'd like to make a statement. Going back to something we spoke about earlier in regarding education and the medical profession. I think some of the areas of deficiency have to do with the lack of quality teachers and quality medical professionals, and that has been my experience that if you don't have a quality doctor, you end up going back to the doctor's office over and over again, or you have to go see 3 specialists, and that creates a horrible expense. And I'm also finding that in the educational profession, I'm running into that as well. Excuse me, hiring a sociologist to be a 3rd grade teacher is not a quality educator. And so you're spending more money for the teacher to get caught up to be at the standard or level that she's supposed to be, or he, and then your children are not being educated the way they need to be, and so there's, you know, a discrepancy there, a disparity, and so we need to focus also on making sure that the staff that we have is A+ quality, and that many times that we're hiring staff that are B+ quality, but they're getting paid A+ quality. And then somehow, some way, we're still having to do all of this extra work to bring them, you know, up to the level that they're supposed to be at, which is an added expense. And we just need to fine tune and evaluate all of that so that it's at the very best place. Efficiency.
I think that speaks to the real staffing shortage that we have at many of our schools, and that, you know, in many cases, there was an article in Digger, or maybe it was on Vermont Public Radio this summer, but in one district, they were literally going into cafes and just talking with people saying, hey, might you be interested in teaching? Because literally classrooms are not able to find anybody to go in front of them. And as I said at the beginning, really one thing we can all agree on and sort of know is that a high-quality teacher in front of students is the most effective investment you can make.
So what I'm hearing, if I'm not mistaken, is that we should be listening to Governor Scott's letter about the possible 7% increase in property taxes at a minimum, and that really there will not be any major changes to the way education is funded or how it will look to property owners going forward, at least for this next year.
I would say that's an absolutely fair statement. I think the message from the governor is for everybody to hear. I think you're going to have to do the best you can, as you have done. You could funding, how you fund education is something we talk about all the time. There's a lot of people who just say, can we move it all to the income tax? That's first of all, we are already fairly progressive in the way we do it because we have the income sensitivity portion of it. So the change in sort of the burden on people wouldn't change dramatically. How you pay for it, you'd pay for it as a weekly deduction out of your paycheck, would be easier, probably feel better than writing out one big check. But the other real sort of logistical challenge is that you have to essentially collect that money locally because it's all based on local spending. And that's where the sort of confounding part of it comes. Just to speak to that very briefly. But yes, there's no magic amount of money that we can pour into education that exists out there to meet the costs. And we haven't ever solved healthcare, which is clearly, so the same headwinds exist. I think the idea here was to make sure everybody was aware of them early on, so that we don't have any surprises. And we are always open to, ideas. The phase-in of the new weights and the sort of taxing capacity issue is going to be forcing a lot of other districts to be looking at their bottom line even harder than you're probably going to have to do. And what we really need, I think, what we as a state need is that every school district understands that we're all in this together because of our statewide funding system, and that, somebody might say at another district, well, if we do this, it's only going to save us 2 cents on our tax rate. Well, if every district saves 2 cents on their tax rate, it actually has a multiplier effect on everybody.
I have a thought there. So one of the things that is always in the back of my mind is, and we've talked about staffing shortages, it's hard to find good teachers. These are just realities, right? But so, I mean, in the area, whatever you want to consider the area to be, let's say, for example, there's 10 districts. There's not, just in this example, right? And we say, well, we want to be fairly competitive with how we're paying our staff, so we want to be, somewhere in the 6 or 7 range, right? We want to be above the middle, but maybe not the, paying the most, because we want to be able to attract good staff. Well, the problem with that is our per pupil spending 7 out of 10 or 6 out of 10? It might not be, but you're stuck in that position of you have to do something, otherwise you're going to be left without staff. Mm-hmm. So much in the way that the state has negotiated healthcare benefits across the board, maybe salaries is another place to look, because then, obviously it'd have to change by county, region, whatever, but that might be a way to level the playing field. But that would also mean that districts like ours that tries to be, competitive enough to get staff, we might feel the fallout of that. So,
sure. I've heard that there are many times that you lose teachers to go north to get a larger salary.
And it's also worth saying too that our teachers are undercompensated for what they're asked to do, and all staff really, we should say, so that's another problem, right? Like, I mean, we see it in healthcare. Look at what nurses have seen for increases over the last 10 years, because these jobs are hard. It's hard to get people that want to do it, especially when it's somewhat thankless. And, our teachers are really the heroes here. We're kind of view us all as some version of failures, and really the teachers are the ones that are saving the day.
And I think it's, sort of universally understood, not just in Vermont, in this country, and frankly, there are plenty of examples of it across the world. The needs of students are not coming into school ready to learn like they used to. The behavioral challenges that teachers are reporting are like they have not. You can talk to veteran teachers and they'll say it's nothing like what we've seen, or it's far different than what we've seen previously. And that's coming at a significant cost too.
My last question, just because I was thinking about this, and I always come from the finance side just because that's where my brain goes, but you mentioned that the committee that you're on is an 18-month committee. And exactly when did that start? Did that start in June, or has it not started yet?
Basically, its charge is to give a report to the legislature of 2026.
By 2026.
Yeah. So you could say it theoretically started July 1st of 2024.
Okay. So then, essentially, we may not see anything change for the next couple of years. Major changes, I guess.
Unless, other than some sort of funding change. I mean, because there's just simply no magic bullet out there that's going to take care of this problem. It is a cost of education problem, and if we want a long-term vision of our state and how we can fund it, it's going to require really systematic changes and different expectations that people may have.
Because we've already consolidated once back in 2016 due to incentives and whatnot, there are some districts, many of them small rural ones up north and maybe some others around, that have not consolidated, or they have not, they're potentially very small. And so will the legislature be looking at them, or how Is there a way for them to look at, I guess is.
That is absolutely part of the charge of the commission,
Okay.
is to
Is to
take
look
a
at
hard
those.
look at our delivery system
Okay.
and what makes sense, not just economically, but for student opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably, if any of you read the Addison and Bay, you may have seen the struggles that are going on in Ripton, where they have a K-1-2 classroom that, you know, has roughly, I don't know, 13 kids, which is a small class, but very challenging for a teacher to teach to such a broad range of levels.
We did that in Sudbury. My kids went through that K-1-2 class kind of structure. 4, 5, 6, also hard.
Yeah.
Anytime you add more than 2, even 2 is hard.
Right, and, you know, I think people are sort of figuring that out, and our demographics are, for that age group, continues to get smaller. And then we throw in the housing shortage. You know, if you have a small community and you don't have houses for sale, and you're gonna run out of children because they can't move in.
Are you also looking at the number of students that are homeschooled and why they are home? I mean, I'm curious if that is part of our problem. I mean, I don't want to, you know, if you homeschool, that's fine. But, you know, what are the reasons? How many kids do we have that are being homeschooled?
It's increased for sure since COVID,
Mhm.
but I'm not sure the number's enough to, if they
No,
were-
I'm not looking
if
for
those who
numbers.
left came back, if it would move the needle significantly.
Mhm. Okay. Any other questions for our legislators tonight?
I got one more.
Okay.
We keep hearing a rumor about expanding the pre-K.
Oh, 4-year.
Yeah, so like
Full day 4-year.
Didn't mean to leave that out of our initial comments. Neither one of us are terribly involved. That is a commission that was set up a year and a half ago, and they are supposed to be delivering their recommendations to the legislature this January. I haven't seen a preview of that, and I'm not sure what the recommendation will be. It'll be nothing more than a recommendation. And, you know, I'll tell you from my point of view, what we need is fewer shocks to the system right now. And so I'm not sure, depending on what it says, how much we'd be willing to take on, or how much we feel the system can take on.
We can tell you from our standpoint here at RNESU that if you go full day 4-year-old preschool, it kicks our 3-year-olds out. I mean, we don't have space for them.
Yeah.
And we don't want to lose, you know. The sooner we can, right, the sooner that we can get them in, the sooner we can get them help if they need it, or
right.
Things like that. So.
Yeah, for special ed, that's critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions?
Lori, did you see that Renee's hand is up?
No, but I think it's because of the way the thing is. So Renee, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you guys for coming out today. I just have more of a statement rather than a question. So I just want to make sure that as we go through the Future of Education Committee and the next 2 years of the legislature, that we don't forget the whole reason why Act 127 came into being in the first place, to make sure that we're trying to create a substantially equal education for the students who need that extra help. But at the same time, I think we may have lost what a substantially equal education actually means, because I'm not sure if we're really asking school districts to really talk about the outcomes that they're getting, whether it's students who are graduating, going to work, students going to college, students who aren't finishing school, things like that. So I think it's really important that that the legislature and this committee take further steps to really guide our work. I think we end up spending a lot more money when we have 110 different ways of educating our students substantially equal. And so if we can figure out how to come up with some economies of scale where we're able to come together as districts, come together as schools, and produce students ready for the future, I think that needs to be on the table too, as opposed to trying to keep everything as separate as possible. So just wanted to make sure that stays put.
I really appreciate that comment, and it does go to sort of one of the hearts of the debate that we're going to have ongoing in the next couple of years, and that is the tension between local control and sort of what Renee's talking about, where we have 110 different ways of doing things. And that's, local control is something that Vermonters have valued and treasured for 200 and some odd years.
But yeah, and there's more and more of a discussion on many different fronts besides just education, that maybe we need to have more regional, maybe each town can't have its own, its services independently. Maybe it's better if we all pool our services together and can more efficiently run our EMS, fire, police. I mean, the kind of list goes on and on. Regional planning, sort of larger, more effective, more cost-effective ways.
Well, I would just like to say that as you return back to the legislature, we'll probably ask you back one more time, probably in February, like we normally do. Maybe sooner, depending on how our budget discussions go. And we are going to start those discussions tonight. But as you have questions, and, please use us as a resource. I'm sure Renee would be happy to help. I know we would be happy to help as a board to give you ideas of where we're coming from so that it doesn't always benefit those northern counties.
As Stephanie would probably say the same thing, the two of us, we've been here a lot. We really appreciate our ability to interact with you guys. We love coming to talk with you when we're invited. So really don't hesitate to invite us anytime you'd like us.
And if you have ideas about anything that even ideas that you might think are a little crazy, like send them to us and then and send them to, we'll get them to the commission, especially in light of that study that's going on. So keep your input coming, because I think it's really valuable. I mean, it's really valuable to have RNESU's voice.
Okay, I've got a crazy idea right now.
I just want to say, I would also, when we set up the commission, we sort of tried to not make it it's not legislative heavy.
Okay.
It's the field heavy. And, really use the VSBA, the Superintendent Association, Principals Association as well for learning and providing feedback too.
Okay, so when you talked about, I'm going to use the word consolidation again, in terms of efficiencies, I think one thing that is under-discussed is that New England, particularly northern New England, is where participatory democracy was invented. And that's particularly true in Vermont because there's a great take on the American Revolution, that the American Revolution isn't just about changing government or even the form of government. It's about an attack on deference. And that as people become less deferential, they become able to speak up for themselves more. And that Vermont is really one of the key birthplaces of that attitude. And there's a loss that goes with taking that away. People become more subjects rather than citizens. They become less participatory. They become more wedded to their online communities instead of their physical communities and local communities. I worry a lot about those trends. I see it generationally, and I see it in the even the discussions we've been having about why can't we get people to show up and talk about what the schools need, because, it's all our children. The withdrawal from community is a huge problem, and I wonder if, I fear, I should say, that when the legislature says, oh, well, let's be more efficient, we'll get our fire and our this and our that, all these services in larger areas, you're going to have less participation. You're going to have more people saying, Middlebury controls our local fire now. Why should we care? And we'll lose. Really, I'm absolutely sincere in saying Vermont's gift to the world. The idea that independent, proud people can govern themselves. I fear we're losing that nationally, and it's a concern.
I'll keep that. I'll keep that. And I'm happy to move forward.
And I would say we also need to evolve as to what we define as our community. We've been sort of stuck in these borders that were drawn in the 1600s. When we talk about education, it's about our town and our school that's in our town, and we need to think about maybe our school community, as we have done sort of through the Act 46 unification. We need to redefine that as a broader area. it's a hard transition to make, and I share your concerns.
One more question.
It's not a question. It's a thought. I've been sitting here and thinking about this, and since you're open to new ideas, the situation we're in at the select board is facing a question of policing, and we find ourselves with the expectation of needing more and more police. And this path we're going down is unsustainable because it's requiring us to, we don't have the ability to keep doing that. So the question becomes really, what is public safety? And it changes the question of more police is not always more public safety. And I would suggest that with education, when I think about education, you know, it seems like the purpose of the education system is to create citizens, you know, capable citizens. Mm-hmm. And I'm not convinced, it feels like the path we're going down, and I often sympathize when you guys get put through the ringer at budget time, because you have nothing left to cut. It's like you've cut everything down. When you talk about Barry cutting to the bone, because they've got, and then they're deferring, because as soon as you defer, you just make it so it's going to happen next year worse, you know? And where I come down to is, what does it take to create a citizen? And I think we need to rethink what that means. My son finished his education 10 years or so ago. He's successfully on his career. We homeschooled during most of our time. He dipped into the public education system to see what was going on there, loved it. I spent most of my time in music working in schools in one capacity or another, and so, you know, I love being in schools, but I'm not convinced everybody has to be there for 12 years. And I'm not convinced they all have to go through the same hoop. And I mean, one of the little notes I wrote on my paper is that, you know, some people need a lot of health care, some people don't need any health care. I mean, I've gone uninsured most of my life and have been fine because I'm a healthy guy. Other people, bless their hearts, need a lot of health care. And I think with education, we need to find a way to allow people that don't need a lot of stuff to be able to go and become citizens without necessarily having to fill up the system. And I think what we need to revolutionize this idea of what it means to educate someone. And the path we're going down is unsustainable. We cannot have 10%, 20% year after year after year. Same with healthcare. Now, is that a solution out of that? You probably don't hear a solution coming through that real clear. But I think it requires that out-of-the-box thinking, and that's why what really triggered me to say something, because I wasn't going to say anything. But when you said that you're open to out-of-the-box ideas, truly, the out-of-the-box idea is stopping going down this path that is clearly unsustainable and saying, what does it mean to educate? I happen to believe that most of us are educated by our family and by our community and by relations, and that's really where most of our citizenship comes out of. And that means giving up some of this model of a factory of creating students.
I think you kind of touched on it though, right? I mean, schools have become a sort of pseudo-social programs, and a lot of families, that's the way they treat it, right? I mean, you look, I mean, not everyone comes from the same situation. It sounds like, you know, when you were raising your kids that you went above and beyond to be involved, and some parents do and some parents don't. And some kids have no support structure at home, and you're just glad if they show up the next day. So,
and I want those kids who need support to get the support, the same way with healthcare. But I just think we've got a system. It's like if we tried to have everybody eat with a chef creating food for them, none of us could afford to eat because it's expensive to get someone who's really trained to cook food properly to make food for you all the time. We learn how to make our own food. You know, many of us cut our own wood and find ways to heat our homes in ways that, you know, use our own skills. I think we should be nurturing citizenship creation from within our local control. And then we don't have to feel like we're all at the mercy of healthcare and at the mercy of expenses that are rising around us, because I don't see how you're going to create a budget that people actually want. No matter how much work you do to shave and cut and jam it all in, it's not going to please the people because they're ultimately having to buy something that they can't afford. And that's the expectation piece. I think this is with the policing, and I'm sorry if I'm spinning here, but with the policing, it's really readjusting people's expectation of what it means to be safe. And it's not about more police, it's about community connection. And I think with education, it's not about more and more programs and systems and professionals and staff. It's really about what does it take to live day to day, and how can we grow that locally?
Okay. It's a good thought. It really is. Sometimes you do get stuck in a rut and we think we have to keep going down the same path.
That makes me think, are you rethinking the standards or the requirements that we have for schools? I was kind of appalled that my son had to have all these credits for PE, but yet he didn't need as much in business or finance, he needs to know how to do books, not run a mile, are they rethinking what the requirements are for the curriculum for kids? And to Tim's point, does it have to be the same for every kid?
So the answer to that is, one of our challenges, as Renee was saying, is that no, we have state level educational quality standards. How those standards are met are left up to school districts, and requirements for graduation that are above and beyond sort of the minimum requirements are decisions of school boards. So if you wanted every student at OV to have financial literacy, that's a requirement that you can add. It is not one that exists at the state level.
I did submit a bill on that, though.
By and large, the legislature has been one to say, because we've had a very long tradition of local control, to say, here are the standards that we feel need to be met, the minimum standards, but that it is up to the school districts as how they want to meet them. Well, and many of the standards, of course, built on national standards.
Right. Well, and I'm also thinking teachers. Just because you have a master's degree does not mean that you are the best teacher that there is. So how can we be interviewing and finding out what people's skills are outside of a degree? Because, as we know, people aren't getting those degrees anymore. And we talk about paras moving up, but for many of them, they don't have the time to get that degree. They may be really smart and skilled and can handle the students, but having to get the master's degree to just be the first grade teacher, they don't have the time. So, I don't know, rethinking that in a different way.
Well, and if we have an opening and we only get 2 applicants too, you don't really have much of an option.
Because people don't have the master's degree.
Right.
Getting their GPAs is also part of that process, making sure you know what that is. Even at that level, they have a GPA. They either graduated with their master's degree at an A or a C minus. And so that's part of the process too.
All right, well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be here. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank the members of the boards from the local towns for being here as well. It helps us to have the conversation, and I hope that it helps you guys as well.
It definitely helps us, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, of course.
Nice to meet all you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.
Okay, so we are going to move on with our meeting. Consent agenda. Can I get someone to make a motion, please?
Move to pass this consent agenda.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you, Natalie. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstaining? Thank you. All right. Monitoring report. In your packet is 2.4 financial planning and budgeting. That was provided to you by Renee. We do have to accept it. If we could get someone to make a motion to accept, then we can discuss if needed.
Move to accept. Oh,
Go ahead.
I'll second.
So they're flip-flopping this time. Okay. All right. Discussion. Anything anybody needs to know specifically?
Where are we?
Give everybody a minute.
Thank you.
Can you scroll down, Renee? Because we're only seeing like part of your. Thank you.
Yeah, this first part, this particular policy has many components. As you can see, it's got a beginning, and then it's got 4 additional components. So first of all, I'd like to really thank Brenda for helping me put this together, because this, while I can easily do the wording, she had to provide the vast majority, if not all, of the evidence. So I thank her tremendously. So I think the biggest thing that I want to talk about is this first piece where this language is kind of unclear. So I had to diagram it and figure out what it really kind of meant to me and how I would interpret it. And so I just kind of cleared it up to make sure that the superintendent and the administration really shouldn't allow any financial planning to deviate from the board's ends, cause financial jeopardy, fail to derive from goals set for this year or the remaining part of any fiscal year. And I think it was really important for me to really, and that's kind of why I brought up the statement about the substantially equal access to a quality basic education, is because I need to determine, or I interpret financial planning is the school district and the board getting ready to provide our students with a substantially equal access to a quality basic education. And kind of my concern is that definition is spread across so many different school districts that it's really hard to understand what a quality basic education truly is, even if you're looking straight at the EQS standards. This new format for the executive limitation, Jeannie Collins shared this with me and said that this is the new model, effectively, where there's the interpretation, then there's observable conditions, followed by evidence, and then here, as we scroll down, you'll see all the components of the observable condition along with the data and result. So you and our constituents can click on to any of these links and see how we're meeting the standards. And then as we get lower, we talk about whether we're in compliance, and we move on to the next 2.4.1. And then the same thing holds true for the next 4 components. And when there's a need to define things, I define things.
Great.
Thank you for thinking that through.
Oh, no problem.
So is there any questions for Renee about his report? Okay, then all those in favor of accepting his plan for 2.4 financial planning and budgeting, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Thank you for that. Moving on to governance process, we have our own board monitoring report, which is 3.2, oversight of the superintendent. I didn't print it off though. So,
Want me to read anything?
I just hope that all of you have looked at it and want to know if you have any changes to make to it from last year other than the dates of the reporting.
I can put it up once I find it.
Do we need a motion for that?
No, it's our own report, so we don't really. It's just asking if there's any changes. The only time that we would need a motion is if we wanted to change something. So we'll make sure we change the dates. And is it just a one page or is it more than one?
It's
Just
it's 1 1/8
Okay.
of a page.
Okay. If no one has any changes, we will move on. Okay? Yes? Okay. All right. Policy for action, second reading. Oh, our global ends. This is this. So at our retreat in August, we had made some changes to the global ends, which is the first policy in our policy. So in order to make those binding, we needed to do a second reading 30 days after. So this is the first meeting since the 30 days after. So please review those, make sure those were the changes you agreed to. And then we do need a motion to approve, and then we can discuss.
I'll move to approve the changes to the global ends.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Okay. You can pick whoever you want there, Charlene. Okay. All right, discussion. So I believe so anything we changed is in red.
And it's just that one thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's the grades.
And the grades.
And the grades, excuse me.
Oh, the grades. Oh, thank you.
In my opinion, we discussed this thoroughly last time, so I don't have anything to add.
Okay, we just wanted to make sure that the wording was right.
It's basically just like you kind of reworded or clarified the academic proficiency on 1A.
Yep.
Or 1A. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I don't like our ends anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Well, thank you for that. All right. All right. All those in favor of our global ends changes, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, thank you. Set budget parameters. So is this where you want to give your, okay. So Brenda has graciously put together a presentation for us so that we can talk about our budget for the very first time.
I'm sharing, Brenda. Give me a second.
Oh, good. Thank you, Renee.
You're just going to have to tell me when to click, please.
Go ahead and click.
Beep.
Okay. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead and scroll to the next one.
Okay.
So this is a repeat of what we talk about every year, but there's a lot more information in it this year. So clearly the drivers for the budget decisions start with the Rutland Northeast mission and vision, as well as the ends policy. Our goals, we focus on the equity of opportunity for student achievement, as well as the efficiency in delivery. This is a pretty graphic that was pulled from the letter. So in the governor's letter, there's a link to a letter that Peter was talking about that was provided to everyone by the Vermont School Boards Association, the Vermont Superintendents Association, and the Vermont Association of School Business Officials. And in it, they kind of outline that this is really the best practice for the timeline for the budget. It's exactly what we do. Down in the bottom is just kind of putting it in words versus graphics, but here we are in October talking about the priorities and the budget, October 1st, mind you. But it's important to know, one of the things, I think somebody said it, maybe it was Mr. Giles, budgeting longer doesn't necessarily mean budgeting better. Focusing on our expenses and our outcomes is really where it matters, because a lot of the information, when we put it all together, is not coming until much later. And I hear, understand, and share your frustrations over that. But, so we start today talking about what the budget looks like and the environment that we're in. We've all heard it. We're not surprised by the governor's letter. But it's not until the 1st of November, sometimes the mid-October, that we actually get the VHI rate for how much the premiums are going to increase. The legislature, after Act 127, also put a pause on future arbitration and negotiations on those rates. So those will stay, that premium shares will stay until 2028. So for the next 2 budget cycles, that won't change. Then December 1st, the tax commissioner is going to come out with a letter with recommendations on the property yield, the income yield, and the base education amount. It will probably also talk a lot about the new adjusted property yield. I'll explain that again when we go further on. And then it's not until December 15th by statute, but has rarely been met, that the Agency of Education will provide us with final Act 127 weighted pupil numbers. Between December 1st and December 15th, I work with the school secretaries and the IT department to make sure we're not missing kids and do analytical reviews on those numbers, because that's the denominator. And the denominator, the higher it is, the lower our per pupil spending. The lower our per pupil spending, the better our tax rate. And then at the very end of December, it's usually a Christmas holiday week surprise, comes the local common level of appraisals. And that's really the best time when we can best calculate and project local tax rates and what it means. Thank you, Renee. Just an indication, the next graph is Consumer Price Index. This is all urban. This isn't just New England. This isn't seasonally adjusted. This is all urban over the last few years. If you could go to the next slide. I graphed it before the pandemic and post the pandemic, because that's our reality. So as you can see, before the pandemic, we were under 2%. CPI was trending in the 1+%, not quite making 2. The pandemic hit in 2020. By August 2021, so 1 year after the pandemic, the CPI went up to 5%. The following year, it went up to 8%. Last year, it dropped down a little to 3%, and this year, August, was down to 2.5%. So we're starting to level off, but when we talk about what Brett was saying, we want to and need to be competitive with our neighbors in regards to teacher salaries as well as anybody's salaries, right? This plays into it because it's a lag. It's kind of a backwards catch up as the CPI rises. Thank you, Renee. So Renee asked me to prepare a level service budget. So let me tell you what a level service budget is. That's taking the current staff that we have and not making any adjustments to them. So not increasing FTEs, not decreasing FTEs, not making adjustments for any class sizes, but it is our new hires. So taking their positions and just aging them up for a year and seeing what that looks like. We made therefore assumptions on what salary increases would be. We increased health insurance by 15%. That's an estimate at this point. I hope it's a good estimate. I'd love it to be less than that. It was 16.4 last year and 12.4 the year before. I'm hopeful, but I don't know. And for Barstow, you can see that that's 3.2%. Not that you care a lot, but just to let you know that, so what does that mean? That means very little by itself. It only becomes important when you apply the number of pupils, the long-term weighted average ADM. That number is much more unpredictable now than it used to be in the past because there are 5 new factors. So
I won't know that number until December 15th at the earliest. So I just used a level number. If that was our spending and assume the same revenues, the fiscal year 25 real final budget spending for Barstow was 13,308. This budget would be, well, they're backward. The state average was 13,229. That was after all the budgets passed, so it's a little bit lower than we advertised in June because budgets passed a little bit lower. And then that 6.2 million, or that increase, would be 13,512. So why that's important is kind of that question that Brett also mentioned and Peter mentioned also, is how are we compared to our neighbors? If you could go to the next slide. So I did Otter Valley. Otter Valley is higher in its growth, and the biggest reason is because Barstow has high school tuition, and they pay a flat dollar amount for the number of high school kids they have. They are going to graduate 8 more 12th graders than their future incoming 9th graders would be. Before that adjustment, they were at 5.8. We are at 6.15. Again, our long-term weighted average ADM is 2,123. The number of real kids we have is closer to 1,400. Actually, it's 1,400 minus Barstow, so it's closer to 1,100. So the reason why it's higher is what Renee was talking about. That's based on how much it costs to educate students with demographics such as poverty, English language learners, sparsity, etc. So this $28 million, if we use the same the same denominator, would put our spending at 13,133. We would still be just a smidgen lower than the state average, and we would increase about $900 versus last year. So today's October 1st, and I prepared this beforehand. So the enrollment slides that I'm going to show you are not final. The only thing I really want to focus on is kind of our projections, but know that they will be adjusted before your next meeting. If you could go to the next slide. One of the things I wanted to show you was this graphic that shows, and Peter talked about it, as did Stephanie, the lack of students, or the decline in students. And so this illustrates from 2018, again, before the pandemic, to 2023, where in the state we are gaining and losing students. You may or may not know, but our supervisory union, Rutland Northeast, is number 36. So that little excerpt is us, and during that time period, as well as our neighbors, we are not in the declining student role. We are in the level or slightly increasing. And we have seen that, you've heard me talk about that, with the pressures at both Leicester, Neshabie, and honestly even Otter Valley in regards to space.
What is SU 051? That's 43%. Is that like Ludlow or?
That is Woodstock. And I don't know for sure. Renee asked me the same question. Just be happy I know 36, right? But I think
it's
that
just so green.
Because between 2018 and 2023, I think they ended up getting some of the non-operating school districts under their umbrella. So I think their geographic size really expanded because of that. I don't think Woodstock is seeing a 43% increase in enrollment.
And to our
Rochester in there.
and to our west, is that Slate Valley? Is that Fairhaven? Where SU
004? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Next slide, quick, before they ask me another question, Renee. So Barstow, I'm just going to skip through Barstow because respectfully I don't think you care. So here's Lothrop. Again, I did kind of put our class sizes. You're going to hear a lot about class sizes from us, as well as you just heard from the governor and from the legislatures. So it's not quite big enough.
Because of
The screen is just,
because of the new projector.
okay, so I'll read the numbers to you. So we had projected 165 students, and we are looking at about 171. So really, we are seeing good guesses on our projections, at least at Lothrop. go to the next slide. Neshabe, same thing. Neshabe actually was a decline, and the decline was in kindergarten. So we had that both at Neshabe and OCA. So Neshabe, oops, we're at OCA already. So Neshabe is down from, we had projected 359 students, and we are looking at about 343. OCA, we had projected 14 and we got 4. So I decided I'm not even guessing anymore. But it is hard to predict those incoming kindergartners. We had expected 85, we got 75, even though there might be flips between the other grades. It really is about kindergarten. And as you can see, the reason why we put the class sizes on this is because we flirt very closely to the low end of our optimal class sizes, straight across the board. Go ahead to the next slide. And Otter Valley, we had projected 519. The data that I used on August 16th was also 519. Go ahead to the next slide. So a couple of things. There are 4 main components in the yield bill that are new this year that I want to bring your attention to. The first one we've already talked a little bit about, and that is the property yield. And what that yield is what determines your property taxes. So they're going to adjust that yield for the statewide average. They're going to lower that yield. And by lowering that yield, it's going to increase everyone's taxes. The intent is to make our unified rate of taxes look closer to what taxpayers will actually see versus being at 100% when we know on average the state is at 76%. The next one is they reinstated the excess spending penalty, which you heard Peter talk about as well. And what he didn't share with that is they also removed any bonded indebtedness for capital construction. So previously, the penalty, the excess penalty calculation had an exclusion for construction projects that you had made. So if you were Burlington and you had that PCB issue and you had to move to Macy's and you approved a construction project, that immediately pushed you over the penalty, that would be exempt. What they did was they basically grandfathered any capital projects, and we have a couple, but it doesn't matter, if the project was approved before July 1st, 2024. So that's that double-edged sword and kind of threading the needle between addressing our facilities, deferred maintenance, and getting smacked down for actually doing a construction project.
But it's better to be outside in tents, right?
Yeah.
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 The other thing they're going to introduce or reinstate is the ballot language. Not a big deal. It actually is intended to help people understand that that percentage increase in your budget is only one piece of the formula. The one that really matters to you in regards to your tax rate is your spending increase or decrease in your per pupil spending. So that's actually a really good re-addition to transparency. And then they talked a little bit about the commissioner, and right there is the actual language of what their role is. If you go to the next slide.
Brenda, just a real quick question.
Sure.
So that number in the blanks, the per pupil education spending for the current year, that's going to be based on the number from the long-term weighted pupil, correct? As opposed to the number from before?
Yes. So that would be $13,155 if everything was already done, which, hey, go for it, people. It's interesting, I'm not sure how we would say which is blank percent lower than the prior one. I am assuming that I will recalculate the current year to use the adjusted CLA to get, well, no, the per pupil number won't change, that's the tax rate. So yes, it would be that $13,155.
Thank you.
So do I need to go over this anymore, or did everyone understand the adjustment to the statewide yield? We're good, okay. Next slide.
No one understands it.
Yeah.
No one wants to.
Excellent.
They just don't want me to say it again?
Right.
Okay.
Strong.
Yep.
Understand.
Yep.
Heard words, yes.
Yep.
All right, go
That's
ahead
part
to
of
the
the
next
magic.
slide.
No one understands.
Just again, this is the excess spending, and so they have a calculator and tells you what it is. I already told you that they've taken out any future bond payments. If you go to the next slide, we're good. We're really good right now. So I don't know if you can see that, but if you jump to the bottom, the formula is right now estimating that threshold would be 16,108.
Oh, yeah, we're well below.
We're well below that. And I don't know how much of a construction project we would need to do to pick up $3,000 per student in capital debt. But it's out there just to know, and you can see kind of the numbers that we had on the side. That is 2025, current year. So those are real numbers.
Are there a lot of districts that are actually would be over that excess spending? I mean, I know you probably.
Yes. I live in one.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
There are a lot of districts that very much come close to that $16,000 number.
Okay.
Is that because of construct? No, because those would be
That's all
grandfathered in.
grandfathered.
This is just.
Yeah, they might. They might not hit it because they will carry some grandfathered debt. So not to pick on Burlington, that would be unfair. But when they did have to rebuild a new school after moving out of Macy's, without this protection, they would have immediately blown past it. Okay, so again, in that letter, there's a link to the VSBA, VASBO, and VSA report. And it really kind of talks about what's the best guidance and what our roles are. And so, you know, the recommendation is that the superintendent, and this is how we've always operated, the superintendent works with the district and school leaders to draft a budget that meets your parameters. We then inform you, the superintendent informs you of staffing, operational changes made to produce the budget that aligns with our goal guidance, with your guidance and parameters. We share with you how the budget was met and how it meets those goals. And then ultimately, you're responsible for selling the budget to your community and adopting a budget that you feel your community can support. So just to remind you, this isn't a secret, but let's talk about what the real drivers are. There's no secret here. The number of personnel. Vermont as a whole, when you count all staff, you know, teachers, custodians, paraeducators, school secretaries, administrators, principals, bus drivers, you count the whole gamut, we have about 4-to-1 ratio. That's not unusual, but that is our biggest driver, is the cost of personnel. Collective bargaining agreements, which as Brett touched on, you have to balance our needs with our neighbors so that we can continue to hire the best of the market of teachers, actually all staff. Health insurance, just a reminder, it's going to be as is for the next 2 budget cycles. Inflation starting to settle down, but still a little bit higher than we've been used to. Special education, facilities, I'm going to come back and see you again at the end of the month with the facility information and the top 3 to 5 priorities that we've identified. And then just as an FYI, the tuition, you know, kind of the average statewide high school tuition for 25 is $19,774. That number does not include the cost of vocational education or the CTE centers, special education, transportation, and sometimes it doesn't include debt service. It's not a whole number, but it is an expensive number.
Are you saying that's the rate that if I didn't want my kid to attend Otter Valley to go to another school, I would have to pay? Or is that?
That's a good question, and no.
Okay.
If you decided you didn't want your child to go to Otter Valley and you were to attend another school, you would have to pay whatever that school charges.
Okay.
If you are a Barstow and you do not operate a high school in grade 9 through 12, and a student chooses a public school, they have to pay the public school rate. If they choose a private school, Killington Mountain School, MSJ, any of those, that's the rate, that's the maximum rate we pay.
That's the maximum rate you would pay?
Yes.
Okay.
The parents are responsible for the rest.
Okay. So Otter Valley doesn't necessarily pay that to anybody? Okay.
Next slide, please. So as you're thinking about your budget parameters to us, just we ask that you think about, does the budget spending meet the district's stated priorities or goals? Does the budget include class sizes that are within your policy? Do you want to change your policy? Does the budget allow the district to meet equity quality standards and district quality standards? And sometimes those conflict. So as Peter said, those are recommendations, but sometimes they do conflict with the size of our schools and what their recommendations are for best practices. Are we appropriately addressing facility needs? Does the proposed spending on staff costs, salaries, and benefits achieve the stated priorities of the goals of the district, of you? And how does our cost per pupil compare to other similar districts in the region? And then the last one is, how does the budget impact taxes? So the last question, again, I'm not going to be able to tell you until late in December, but if you have any questions, I think we try to provide you with this data to make those, to be able to answer those questions.
Kevin?
First, thank you. This is very, very helpful. And I find the last slide about the questions particularly helpful. That's all I have to say. I don't have a question.
When do we have to have a budget by?
No.
Since we're throwing
Yeah, you
dates
could
out.
just do it tonight.
Yeah. So the budget has to be finalized by the the third week in January.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the date is in there. I think it's
Yeah.
like January 15th or 17th this year.
Something like that, yeah. So, but we will see a first draft of a budget in November.
December.
In December. We won't see it till December.
So Rutland Northeast will usually see their first draft
November.
Thanksgiving week, and then that will filter into the local budgets for December.
Okay.
It's really helpful that you have it on like October 1st, December 1st.
So we want to set parameters then?
Well, I mean, if you want them to provide a budget, then yes, I think we need to have some parameters.
We'll have thoughts. Whenever we're ready to have that conversation, I have thoughts.
Well, spew.
So I think I felt, and it felt that there was a lack of information last year. I felt behind the entire process. Part of that's my fault, and I think we as a group were behind the entire process. So what does that look like? How do we fix that? My thought was, and I'll probably be the only one that feels this way, is that we should do things in reverse this year, which is, what does the budget look like if we were to either level service or level fund, right? Pick up a minimum threshold, and then look at things up from there, but start at the bottom rather than starting at the top and then trying to work backwards. I think that might be better for, at least I view it as better, to see, okay, here's what the minimum is, and here's what it would take to get there, and then, do you want to go 2%, 4%, whatever, 10% over, here's what we would add back in.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, we have the level budget right here, right? That's what this is. If
It's
we
just a
were
number.
just to do pay increases based on
Right, there's
inflation.
that 6 point, which is a 6% increase.
Yeah.
Right there. So that's your starting point, roughly.
I would
Well,
want to
it could be
know
our starting point, we have to decide that.
what I mean, I would say yes,
It
it is.
doesn't have to be. We could say we want the number to stay the same and the services to slide too, if we wanted to. I'm not saying that we should.
I don't think we should.
Well, I
We
don't
could
think we
set
should.
the threshold
So-
whatever we want.
what are the have-tos? Like, what do we have to have? What are the needs that have to be done?
Well, so here's the thing.
There may not be any.
This, from my standpoint, and my standpoint alone, is that when we ask for budget parameters to them, usually, and this is only usually, and last year is out of the park, but usually we say that we want no changes to services that we provide, unless it makes sense for them to do that. You know, if there's a reason, you know, we now have sixth grade and we now have a middle school, sixth grade has moved in, or there's a change to the way we provide literacy, whatever. But usually we tell them to bring us a budget that doesn't change and doesn't cut anything. We don't want to cut sports. Right. We don't want to cut, any extracurriculars. We don't, that's usually what we say. And so that's normally why you would get that 10% increase or whatever. And so then you kind of feel like you're behind the eight ball because you're like, oh crap, And I will say, again, just my feeling, is that we had failed budgets because people were ticked off at Montpelier because, they gave us one thing and then at the last minute they pulled the rug out from under us. So the way they said, hey, Montpelier, we're mad at you, was at the ballot box. Having said that, this is the second year. We already know that we're 7% behind, as per the governor's, and that's not
to stay the same, right? Based off the numbers, right?
Yeah, probably. So the question is, what are those parameters? I mean, when we look at our when we look at our ends, we want our kids to be able to be global citizens. We want them to be able to head to college or be able to be workforce ready, or we want them to not sit on grandma's couch, after they graduate for the next 5 years. I'm hearing from them that there's not going to be any major changes to the way they fund education, at least for the next year or maybe two. And so therefore, when they say, think outside the box, it's kind of hard to think outside the box when all of your funding is based on what they provide. So,
one advantage to Brett's approach, and something that I had a lot of trouble talking about last year, is that it will give us the ability in a conversation with people to say, okay, if you want to level fund, this is what you'll be losing. And part of the reason we didn't know that last year was because it was Montpelier's fault. But I always felt behind. It's like, you need to cut more. Okay, well, what will that cost us? And it made those budget discussions we had very, very difficult, I thought.
Well, everybody was feeling pressure too. I mean, everything has risen. Yeah. Food costs,
Yeah, and people do understand that.
Right.
Everybody understands that.
No, right.
But I would like to be able to say, look, we're going to lose French teacher. We'll lose, maybe we'll have to, cut this for sports. The library won't grow. This will happen. There'll be, we can't repair the leaky roof in Leicester. Those are the sorts of things I'd like to be able to say, because that gives people a cost-benefit analysis to run through in their heads. Do I want rain leaking on the roofs of the heads of my kids?
Well, it puts it out there, right? The what if, right? If I vote no on this, what's going to happen? And last year we didn't know.
But this year, I suppose we can speculate.
That's what I was proposing.
Yeah.
Establishing those parameters also allows, I think, for principals to be working within a certain framework that is, can let them shift. I mean, we're not telling them where to put their money. We're just saying this is the money.
That's what our meetings. Debbie and I are going to start meeting with the principals next week, going over their data and asking them to consider what needs to be addressed over the next year, so that way, as they're developing their budget, they know how to or they know where that they need to place money, place personnel, if they need to ask for more, or if they need to move some around in order to make things happen. So
as a principal, I've been in that situation where I'm told you cannot raise any money. You have to do it within what you already have, and then that gets you to be thinking about prioritizing that from within, right? And it does get you to think creatively. So I don't think it's a bad start, as long as we do it early enough, so that when things have to shift because there's some major thing that's happening that we need to address, then we have the opportunity to do that, right?
So, as far as board parameters are concerned, if you wanted that, I don't think you want to get to a zero-based budget. I just don't think that's fair, but we could try to get to a, they would have to cut 6% essentially out of that budget, correct? Is that what you were?
Yes. Yeah, it's I think it's about $1.6 billion.
Okay.
There it is.
All right.
Our
So,
teacher contracts are up this year too, right?
yes.
So did we just estimate those?
That's all we can do, yes. Teachers, paras, bus drivers, monitors, and custodians are all estimated.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to cut back in professional development and conferences for teachers and the board and the superintendent? Is there, while still meeting regulations?
So we cut all the board professional development out of our budget last year when we were doing budgets, as far as the money that was pertained to that. As far as professional development for our teachers are concerned, it is in their master agreement. So they are, at least the current agreement says that I think they get 9 credits.
9, and that's
It's
my
9.
next
I think
question.
it's and
6?
right, there's 6 and 3, something about 6 and 3, but it's a maximum of 9.
3 is only if they don't yet have a master's degree,
Okay,
and it has to be an approved master's program.
right. So the only way to change that stuff is to negotiate it. And we'll actually.
I just
you'll
don't
be
know
on-
if there was other ways that they could get professional development that was less expensive
So there's-
versus having, a 2-day conference and overnight stays and that.
So there's actually not that much of that. As you would be surprised, a lot of it is done right at Castleton. They do a lot of that there.
Oh,
There's a lot of
for-
professional development done online. But there are some conferences where they can only get what they're looking for if they're specialized in something that would require an overnight stay or an overnight accommodation airline, even maybe. So, but it has to be approved. So if they have to prove that that's the only place that they can get it,
Okay,
if that makes sense.
yes,
So,
thank you.
yep. Well, why don't we ask them to provide us with a budget that's only a 3% increase? It's half of what they've, if we left everything alone. So what would we need, what would they see us cutting? I guess my other thought is that when they look at budgets and they look at their staffing and the level of kids and all of that, they're already starting to think about, they're constantly thinking about, we may only need 2 5th grade teachers in this school and not 3. Or we may need, so I sometimes like to see those changes first. But again, I'll leave it up to you guys. I don't care as long as in January we approve a number so that we can start telling people, what our plan is.
Yeah, I think looking at both sides would be helpful, right? So I mean, if we say here's the number to do nothing different than what we're doing today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what 2% the other side of that would look like, and here's what 2% more would look like. That way we have a gauge for what we're.
So essentially what you're saying is that if that says that if we do nothing, it's a 6% increase, that's the budget you want them to bring forward. Yes. And then a budget that is 2% less than that? So like a 4% increase?
We could do it any number of ways. We could
Well,
say,
I'm just
let's start
asking.
at a budget that's 2% less, right?
Okay.
And then we know what 2% more would be, because it would be
Good.
even, right? And then what's 2% beyond that, right? That way we can see the range of the options and go from there.
But we're talking about the one in the middle is that 6% increase. That's what I'm asking. I'm asking you, what's the starting point? Is it the 6% that they've said it looks like it might be, and then go, so much on either side?
I think I would be okay with that. I don't know.
Well,
what
and
everyone
how
else
does
thinks.
everybody else feel?
I think being in line with the state is, estimate as a starting point is probably a good idea, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Everybody knows there's been inflation and
Okay. So, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we're starting with the budget, which is the 6.15% that they showed us would be keeping everything the way it is. Then we are asking them to bring us a budget that is 2% less than that, or are we just saying, bring us a budget that's, I don't know. I hate to put you to percentages because
Me too. I feel like
I don't want
here's
to.
what we have to absolutely have. We don't have a choice. What is that? And maybe there aren't any.
I think it's easier on Brenda if we give her a number, though. I don't know.
Well, I guess my thought is that if we start with the 6% and we say, okay, this is status quo, we leave it alone. Now tell us what we can do without. Here's all the things that maybe we could get rid of. And here's all the things that if we could go higher, we would like to do. Does that make sense?
But the assumption is where we're at now is the minimum, and that may or may not be the case. Last year we were behind, right? So by the time we had failed budgets, things were already locked into place. So now if we could say, okay, what's the minimum? Maybe it is 2% less. I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay. Well, right. Nobody knows. Yeah, go ahead, Brenda.
So I agree, it's nice to have some direction. I really like some direction. What we would normally do anyways is no secret. We have 4 kindergartners at Leicester next year. We're not going to keep a full-time teacher for 4 kindergartens in first grade.
Right.
So this budget does not assume those sort of natural reductions that we would do anyways. So this is just if we had exactly the same staff. So I was only kidding when I said you can adopt the number right now because we wouldn't bring that forward. So I don't know, I would assume you want us to continue to do our due diligence, taking a look at our class sizes, maximizing our class sizes, understanding and being able to explain when or why we are below a class size or over a class size from what your policies have said. That's going to get the majority of your cost. Looking at class sizes at the high school, making sure that we are optimizing them, we don't have too many sections, looking at the graduation credit requirements, making sure that we are aligned with our neighbors and looking at all of the other things that we offer that are important to enrich our students' lives, all of the unified arts. So that does include world language. That didn't go over well in conversation last year. So if you're going to say never, ever, ever put world language on the list, that's a parameter you should tell us. Like, this is a non-negotiable. This is what we trust you to negotiate. But world language, art, music, library, making sure we have equitable services across the elementary schools. That's the only way we can really be equitable, because a high school stands on its own. Those things we would do normally anyways. So this is really just to kind of give you, if we did none of that, where we're at. Also looking at things that we can't really control, like what the CTE costs are going to be. That's going to be an assessment that we won't know until the middle of December. I always put a placeholder in so it doesn't come as a surprise, but that's kind of what we would do anyways.
So if you bring us back a 6% increase budget, and then whatever the budget is based on your natural reductions or additions, depending on what you need at what school, can you also provide us a list and the cost of things that, well, we could or we may not necessarily need? You know those
Like
first, kind of those first kind of cuts that, if we were thinking of. I think that's what they're looking for. Like, if we have the 6% budget, that has all the bells and whistles in it, but yet the budget after cost reductions or changes and whatnot only comes in at 4%, let's say, and I'm just guessing. Maybe that's more. Maybe I'm hoping 4%, and then you say, okay, here's the list, because you did provide a list to us at one point saying, board professional development, you cut that, it's $10,000. If you cut a teacher, instead of, yes, it'd be great to have 3 sixth grade teachers next year, but we really could get away with 2 sixth grade teachers at this particular school, and this is what the cost reduction would be. Do you know what I'm saying? Those things that are kind of like on the cliff. Well, we'd love to have them, but
There's a lot of things on the cliff.
okay.
And I think it would be really helpful because, to be honest with you, I'm looking around the room. There's a lot of things on the cliff that I know will not make many of you happy. If you look at the class sizes in our elementary schools, you're going to say, wow, that might really affect my school more than I ever thought or I even want to consider. So knowing where you say isn't on the table is important. I think
it all has to
be
be on the table.
honest, we have some redundancy. We've talked about this before. There's the beauty of local control, but there's a cost associated with local control. We operate Caverly. We do not, it is an added cost. It is an added burden, and we have space in the local school to do that. That was a local decision. That was a non-negotiable you gave us. If you give us non-negotiables, it gives us a lot more ability to make good plans and judgments. But last year, you didn't give us non-negotiables. We said world language doesn't do what we had hoped it would do academically. It puts a lot of pressure on the schedule, stealing away from ELA and math, and we got the message very clear that that was not to be adjusted. So just don't make us make adjustments in the blind if you are set on certain things that can't be adjusted.
Sure. So, and I don't think.
Can I speak for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's really hard though, Brenda, to give you non-negotiables in categories without really micromanaging what's happening within the schools. So for example, if we say, we don't want you to touch the arts or music, right? Then we can say, we want you to really look at class sizes and maximize class sizes, right? But it's very easy, and it happens all the time, that people think that those are extras when they're not. And so it's just, it's not necessarily easy to say what the non-negotiables are from our end. It's much easier for us to say a number or a percentage, because otherwise we would need to understand the ins and outs of every school and kind of really manage things in a way that I don't think is what this board does, sometimes wants to do, but it's not necessarily what I think the principals or the superintendent want us to do. So, it's we can't say, we don't want you to touch foreign language. It's we all have our pet, things that we want to maintain. But I don't think it's fair to put us in a position to say what is the non-negotiable before knowing what it plays on, Do you see what I'm saying? It's very easy to say, hey, music, art, those are extras. They're not. So I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to give you non-negotiables without
don't-
understanding so much more about each of the schools.
I don't
and
think
their
we have
culture.
non-negotiables
Can't tell
at this
you-
time
I
yet.
can tell you, definitely look to optimize class sizes.
I
You know,
would,
that seems to be something that we're paying a lot of money for.
I think everything should be up on the table based on your expertise and judgment and what is working in the schools. Like, we can't make a judgment on what's non-negotiable. It's what's the school need? And that's based on the expertise and experience of the people who are in charge. So for me, I think there are no non-negotiable. Everything is up. Everything's up.
But then how do we set a number, right? How do we set a floor and a ceiling if we say everything's up, right? So, okay, we can do it for the same amount we're doing it today, no increase at all. But we're going to have to get rid of world language, we're going to have to get rid of Caverly, we're going to have to get rid of whatever, right? I don't know what the list is, but those are the things we just talked about, right? I don't know. Do we want to take that approach?
So, my thought, this was just my thought, and you guys can all chime in. We start with a 6% increase budget. Then we see what the budget comes in based on where you come in with your natural changes, every year when you see who you have for staff, blah, blah, blah.
So our data meetings.
Yes, all your data, just like you've always done when you provide us our first run of the budget. So let's hope that comes in less than 6%. But if it doesn't, we have a 6%, we have a 8.5%. And then I would like a list, and I can't say what's non-negotiable because I don't know what other negotiables are. Is it cutting a teacher? Like I said, is it cutting Caverly? Is it, let's look at all those, and then based on what we know and your expertise from both you and Renee and Debbie, we might have to make some choices.
And that's our job. And
Right.
and is as frustrating as it could be for the administration for us to say, oh, wait a minute, we really want that. That's our job. We have to fight it out and say, well, this is more important than maybe we thought it was before because of the feedback we're getting or even because of our own personal inclinations. And then we discuss it and vote, and that's.
Well, there are some fights that she's talking about. The Caverly fight. We've had the Caverly fight many times before. We've backed down every time Pittsford people have come in and said you can't get rid of our pretty school.
Yep.
So at some point we may have to say, sorry. Is that this year? I don't know. But if that is one of the negotiables, then it should be on the list.
Yes, I agree.
That's all I'm saying.
Yes, I agree. Yep.
So.
Well, the same should be said to the other side too, right? I would hope administration would look at it as when they're looking at, what do we need? Like, do we need 7 arborists or can we get away with 2, right?
Right, no, right, absolutely. Yes.
That same critical eye of, nothing is non-negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
So,
No, exactly. Same in the high school. We have 5 history teachers. Do we really need 5 history teachers or whatever? I'm sure they're going to do that department by department. They do that every year. So, or at least I think they do. So, but that I think is what we need in order to do our job is to know what the negotiables are. And then we can make that's going to help us make some decisions.
I also think we as a board should formally ask our NSU board to do the same thing.
Okay. We can bring that back to the RNESU board for their first, because they we'll meet in October, so we'll make sure that we ask for that, because they will review their first budget in November, and then they have to have it approved by December in order to make everything else run. So, and that is a very tight timeline, but just so
it's an impossible timeline. You have to pass a budget without knowing any of the details. It's a type of timeline that really should be changed.
Yeah, because it
Lori, I'm looking at the time and I'm wondering.
Yeah, I was looking at the time too. So this was a very important conversation, Fernanda, and I felt it needed to be finished and not cut anybody off.
I'm just looking at my nursing care needs to go kick into.
Yes, understood. Okay, so So we've given you your marching orders, you've heard? Okay, excellent. And everybody's okay with that, with what we've decided to give to them? Okay. All right, quickly, because it is 8:25, I'm going to take 5 minutes, Fernanda. Can you give me 5 minutes? Okay. So we'll try and run through this quickly. Board vacancies, we still need a Whiting rep. So if you know anybody in Whiting that's breathing, living, thinks that they need to be on this board, please get them here. I've tried all my friends and family, and I'm still getting no's. I even went through their voter checklist and still got no's. So we need somebody. Community linkage, board presence at open houses. Everybody hopefully was able to get to a board or an open house, except none of us should have gotten an Eshby because it was the same night as our meeting. We will have that changed for next year. Board member recruitment, if you, there are, I believe, 8 vacancies, 8 of us running for our positions in March for this board. So those of you who were, appointed will need to rerun for your seat if you want to stay on this board. So if you're planning on not running or you know someone from Whiting, we need to recruit for board members. Budget communication planning, we will adjourn that to the next meeting. RNESU board update. We don't have an RNESU board meeting until next week, until 2 weeks. Yeah, so at night. Did they?
It's on a Wednesday.
Well, what did we do at the last RNESU board meeting? Must not have been much.
It was short.
It was short. Remember what we did, Kevin? Oh, you weren't here.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's on the 16th, 5:15.
Yeah. Well, we'll provide you with an update. It obviously wasn't jarring what we did. Let's see. Other business for future consideration. Anything?
I'd just like to, I can do it now and make a motion that the OVU board requests the RNSU board to.
Oh, I already put it on the thing for RNSU.
Okay.
So we're good there. Anything else? No? Okay. Let's see, work plan. I'm not going to worry about, well, as we get closer to dates with scheduling conflicts, we'll deal with that then. Superintendent informational report, anything, Renee, that you would like anybody to know? You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, nothing in particular, just there's a couple of things on there, namely the most recent data from all of Vermont in the VTCAP. We also had got a good outcome from, or at least a good outcome in part of the mold remediation at OB. We are in the process of cleaning it up and getting it ready, and hopefully we'll have students in there hopefully no later than November 1st, but with a goal of October 15th.
Cool. All right. Let's see. Other than that, our next meeting here is Tuesday, October 15th, 6 o'clock. And I would accept a motion to adjourn. Okay. Au revoir.